What up, Corner Crew? Welcome back to another episode of the Hip Hop Happy Hour podcast. I'm your host, as always, Brad Bailey. He is my co-host, Shah Elemental. How are you, my friend?
I am wonderful, as always. Maybe not always, but I like to think that way, you know? Think positive.
Yeah, think positive. Think positive, unless it's a COVID test. But,
Right. Or an AIDS test, more specific.
Hey, easy.
Even more dangerous.
Easy. Well, we are back, episode number 95, counting down to episode 100, October 17th. It's coming up quick. We got a bunch of announcements coming on the way. If you guys have been on Facebook or Instagram or anything like that, you've seen there's a couple shows coming up. Last night, we had a very, very dope producer battle between Murder Megs and AC, the program director. Megs came on top. As always, 6-man shit. You know how we do. Shout out to her. Shout out to everybody that's tuned into that. If you haven't seen it yet, after this, go watch that and you'll be all good. But for right now, we're going to bring up our guest tonight. We have a man from Louisiana tapping in with us, Moose Harris, ladies and gentlemen.
What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? What's going on, fellas?
Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity, man. I appreciate it. Always love doing stuff like this.
No doubt. Looks like you got some nice weather over there where you're at.
Well, yeah, right now. I mean, if we would have had this interview 24 hours ago, it would have been slightly different. You know, we were just west of the target area from Hurricane Francine. You know, but this so this is like the post-hurricane look. What may happen once everything clears up from storms and things of that nature, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. The way we like to kick off the show is for people that don't know you, tell us who you are, where you're from, and what you're all about.
All right. Well, the stage name is Moose Harris. The government name is Anthony B. Daniels. I'm originally from New Iberia, Louisiana. That's where all the great hot sauce is made. Shout out to Tabasco, Louisiana, Red Dot. You know, I live in Lafayette, Louisiana, and I like to call myself an entertainment polysmith. And the reason why I do that is because I am an artist, 3-instrument musician, several genres, DJ, radio show host, things of that nature. And I just like to put great art together, especially in the music realm, poetry realm, broadcast realm, and give that out to the people. So I do a combination of those things all the time and try to get out as great material for myself and other people as I can.
Dope. Man of many talents.
Yeah, that's how it works. That's the only way it works. Just multitasking, man, definitely. Like kind of like what I'm doing now. I'm actually walking through town right now, going from point A to point B while I'm doing this with y'all.
Yeah. It's good to be self-sufficient also, especially in this game.
Hey, it's a gift and a curse. Self-sufficient is good, but I've always been a team player. You know, I could lead people. I don't necessarily have to be the star. I just want to be a part of whatever I'm a part of that's winning. You know, if we're winning and it's because of my part and not necessarily because of me, then I could deal with that. Just give me the rings. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Oh, we do. We got the Celtics out here. We know all about them rings.
Well, yeah, y'all do. And as a 76ers fan, I totally understand where you're coming from.
76ers fan in Louisiana, that must be rough.
Well, no, not necessarily. I mean, you got to realize that the Sixers came long before the Pelicans. I'm a Pelicans fan as well, but when you have people like Dr. J and Andrew Toney and Charles Barkley, as I'm growing up, because I'm an 80s baby, the first NBA game I ever witnessed in person was the Sixers versus the Rockets right here in Lafayette back in '86. I was already a fan by then. That confirmed it.
Sure, that was like the Ralph Sampson days for the Rockets.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Ralph Sampson and Akeem Olajuwon, the Twin Towers days.
Yep.
Way back with the High Sox.
Oh, yeah.
No. I'm rocking my Adidas right now. taking it back to the 80s.
Yeah, right. Coming up through Louisiana, tell us about the scene that you grew up through and what influenced you to put you on your path.
Well, to be honest with you, hip hop is something that's always been a part, but I've been a part of a lot of different music. I grew up, like I said, as an 80s baby, so a lot of combination of new wave R&B. I'm a Motown historian, so I go way back, Motown, Stax Records, and things like that. And some of the more mainstream forms of hip hop were things that were trickling in. Now, as we go into the 90s, become a teenager, that's when hip hop started to take more control of my life, listening and what may have you being influenced. Because, like I said, I started off as a singer, and I still do sing. You know, I'm currently jazz and classically trained as a singer, studying at the University of New Orleans back in the late 90s. So, realistically, the rhyming part about it, believe it or not, was kind of out of necessity. You know, I had a bunch of people that wanted to get into the hip hop game, wanted to get into the rap game. I was doing all the production for them. And you know how people, you know the differences between people that really want to do it and people that see that they're hobbyists. Well, I ran into one too many hobbyists, and I was like, hell, I might as well just do this shit myself. So I'm already used to writing things for singing or what may have you. So it just take the vocal cords out a little bit, add a few more syllables for the rhyming, and you got what you got now, you know?
Yeah, you can say a lot more in a rhyme than you can singing. You know what I mean? I think that's
Yeah,
one of
yeah,
the things that kind of draws people to it sometimes. I know me personally because I love storytelling and things like that. So it's like other music's great. I love all forms of music. Maybe not country, but like even country though, I like me some Johnny Cash here and there. You know, something like that. But like not so much the twangy stuff. But it's the ability to have that extra room to really expand your thoughts and really get down to it, where it may
yeah,
be an R&B and other forms of music where, you know, obviously it's more repetition of hooks and bridges, and then the verses are more, you know, stretched out like you were saying, and then with hip hop you're
right,
really filling in those pockets.
right. It's a situation where you know those gaps and being able to fill in the blanks in between moments is really what separated. Because when it comes to singing, when it comes to R&B, when it comes to jazz, when it comes to even country, because you know being from South Louisiana, I've done my share of country experience, both listening and participating with all kinds of friends and things too. It's really emphasis on the notation. You know, it's more of an instrument like a guitar, piano, what saxophone, what may have you. But when it comes to rhyming, it's more percussive. So therefore, when it comes to percussion and what may have you, you can fill in more things with paradiddles and fills and things like that. And lyrically, to me, it's the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah.
So I'm
So
definitely interested in the gaps. You know what I'm saying? Always.
Gotta fill them in.
coming up through the 80s and 90s, who are your biggest influences musically that you were listening to? Not even just hip hop. Like who do you love?
Oh, I always start off with my old school legends. I'm always starting off with Marvin Gaye. I'm always starting off with Funkadelic. That's top two. You know, I was fortunate that my parents generated enough of a record collection. They wasn't extensive on it. They didn't have an entire room dedicated to it. But it just so happens that the one man room where they stored the albums that they did have was in my bedroom. So, you know, being able to grow up and listen to Sly and the Family Stone on a Fisher Price record player, and being able to listen to Marvin Gaye and Barry White and all kinds of things from Motown and Stax Records and what may have you on cassettes is really what started for me. At the same time, I was in the background listening to things like Rakim and the Beastie Boys, and you know, I was 12 years old when the Chronic came out, so that's a nice little combination when it comes to puberty and everything else, you know.
Me
So
too.
it's just a combination of
Same.
things. Yeah, I'm a first generation MTV baby, so the new wave era comes in where you know, yes, Duran Duran and Wham, they get all kinds of love. Billy Ocean gets all kinds of love. Rick James, all kinds of love. You know, so it's just been a combination of things. When I got to college in the '90s, that's when the jazz element started to come in because that's the music department I was in. So going from Louis Armstrong to Miles Davis to Coltrane, Cannonball Adderley, those type of combinations came in as I was becoming an adult, and I'd say it fit in at the right time because if you combine that with being able to listen to when Jill Scott, Erykah Badu, and the Fugees, and the Roots, D'Angelo, all came around that neo soul time period, it was a nice mix for me. So yeah, genre doesn't really matter to me as long as the music jams. I'm good with it.
Yeah, same. Like we all grew. I think the three of us are pretty much the same exact age because we were all
Yeah, I was
around
gonna say
12
because I
years
was 12
old.
when the Chronic dropped too, so
Yeah.
we're both the
Yep.
same age.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
people don't realize. I don't think we even can through this digital age even recollect how dope the '90s actually were. Like what a time it was to grow up as a teenager in the '90s. It was a great time.
Yeah, absolutely. I liked how we got to sit with the music too a little bit longer. Like I do love the ease of access to music and how easy it
I'm
is to get things out there, but the pace that it's done
I'm
nowadays is
glad to
almost
have
it's hard
had
to keep up with.
full-fledged decades of things to
Yep. You're cutting out.
listen to.
You're skipping
Oh,
frames.
yeah, he's skipping a lot of frames
Mhm.
and lagging.
But yeah, man, it's like it's crazy because you come up in the 80s, right? Like we all did. And I'm sure most of us was like the first music we were really exposed to was a lot of like pop music and like your Michael Jackson, your Prince, like your Van Halen, like all that stuff that was played on the radio. And it's kind of crazy to think like we grew up on such like poppy kind of music at the time and the popular music that was being played. And now for me, it's like I'm like extreme underground. It's like the antithesis of what we actually came up on. And when the Chronic dropped, that was like a moment of just like wait a
Yeah,
second.
you're absolutely right. I mean, thank goodness for it gives me. Y'all can still hear me?
Yeah, you're back. There you go. We lost you for a second, but yeah, like Shao was saying,
Oh, okay. Can you
like
still hear me now?
yeah, yeah, you're chopping
Yep.
in and out, but we can hear you now.
Oh,
Yeah, the '90s were a
okay.
wild time, man. People don't realize
Yeah,
it.
from what I gathered, you're saying it's a lovely mix. It's a transitional time period that we grew up in. It was a heavy transitional period.
Mm.
The '70s, I would say, studying history was kind of stagnant in comparison. It didn't have hip hop. It didn't have new wave. It didn't have big haired rock and roll. It didn't have as much electronics as what we grew up in the '80s and '90s. So we grew up in a heavy transitional period, and I would dare say that now this time period, this decade, is probably the next transitional period since then, in my opinion.
Mm.
Or it might just be a middle life crisis. I don't know. Either way.
Same difference. But you're right, because it's like with
Yeah.
this new digital age, we've been in it now for what, like a decade? A little bit more, maybe 15
Yeah.
years, something like that, with all this digital stuff. And it's like
I give it about
people are
15.
starting to figure it out.
People are starting to figure it out and expand upon what they initially discovered.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on the way music is consumed nowadays? Because it's so easily accessible and easily, people can just plug in the computer and make whatever the hell they want now.
I mean, on from the creative standpoint, I encourage it because there are several things I wish I had access to growing up, especially in the '90s, that people in bigger markets, bigger cities, bigger states had access to, whether we're talking about the various beat machines or the various recorders or what may have you. So I encourage people being able to use as much technology as they have access to in reference to us creating. My issues come with the consumption of it because I'm starting to see across age categories that as much access as we have towards being able to discover music, as much access, I mean, look how far apart the three of us are in reference towards having this musical conversation and connection. As easy as it is for that to happen here today, for me to have my phone in my hand, talking to y'all, and not necessarily have to stay in the same place while I'm talking to y'all, there's way too many people that's depending upon the older ways of consuming music as being the main end all that bees all in reference towards the music that they listen to. You know, I wish that the consumer had as much of a want to discover music more so like the creators do. I mean, I've heard way too many times, oh, music these days and this generation. No, it's not this generation. Every type of music that you would want to have, that you would love to listen to, that you would find interest in, is there if you just go beyond the stereotypical ways that you've been trying to use the last 10, 15, 20 years of discovering music. You know, the internet's way too big for people to be saying things about like this generation or music isn't the same anymore. No, music will never be exactly the same from one set of years to another. But if you want it to sound more like what you're thinking in your head, hashtag Google is your friend. You know what I'm saying? That's the way I've always looked at it. So I can't stand people my age, people older than me, people younger than me talking about, oh, this music or that music is different. No, I mean that's basically the reason why I have my radio show Urban Flow SARS, because the motto for that is play anything with a groove from Louis Armstrong to the roots. And so therefore I want people to send me things from around the world that I may not otherwise have access to. You know what I'm saying? Or I may not know of, or I may not go deep enough to find, because they deserve opportunity to have that chance to be heard, whether it be a podcast or one of the few FM stations that I'm actually on, or streaming just like we're doing here now. You know, it is way too much technology for the consumer to be as short-minded as they are, in my opinion. I don't have no problem with the creators. You know, it is what it is with the creators. I'm not gonna personally enjoy upfront every single thing they do, because yeah,
Of course not.
sometimes too much autotune could be used. But otherwise, creators, do your thing. It's up to the consumers to really step their game up, in my opinion. You know?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. My personal feelings on that too is like a lot of these listeners are super lazy, right? So when you look at rock, right, you see the rock genre has
Mhm.
genres within itself, and that is extremely established at this point, where you have hard rock,
Mhm.
soft rock, progressive rock, punk rock, heavy metal, new age, new metal. Like there's so many
Yeah.
different, types of rock. And I feel like a lot of the people who look towards the mainstream for hip hop, and maybe because back in their 20s, in the early 2000s, that's how they got their music, and it was only presented
Mhm.
as just hip hop, rather than being like, oh, this is more like club based hip hop, this is conscious hip hop, this is street hip hop,
Yeah.
this is drug dealer
Yeah.
music, this is this. Those people, I think, don't realize, and or maybe are lazy, or they just don't know that there's something out there for everybody in hip hop. And like you were saying, with the ease of use to create the hip hop, that's afforded opportunities for so many different sounds to come about. Now, yes, we do have a ton of copycats, and the copycat stuff with like you were saying, with the auto tune and stuff like that. Where really it's just, and I would like to clarify this for people who don't know. I know you guys know, because you're versed in this, but like auto tune is there to correct singing vocals originally. It's not there to make the vocoder sound. That is what they use that to do nowadays. What they're doing is
Mhm.
not using a vocoder like Zapp, Roger Troutman. Who's the white guy that did? Peter Frampton. Like
Yeah, Peter
those
Frampton.
guys had the actual machine in front of them, had to put a tube in their mouth while they were singing to get that sound. And it's like an assumption nowadays that that's actually what auto-tune is, but it's actually not, because a lot of your most famous R&B singers from the 90s till now, I'm not going to name any names, although I do know a few I could drop, but there are some very famous R&B singers who use that, and they'll go in the studio and they'll sing, but maybe it's not perfect. With a turn of a quick knob, boom, sounds perfect. And to me, it's just, I think the listener has kind of gotten lazy. It's like everybody expects everything to just be handed to them. I don't know if that's because of the ease of information with the internet, and I think people are just not really willing to dig deep sometimes into this stuff. Maybe more so than just, like I said, what's just presented to them from the mainstream or, the casual listen.
Right. I definitely want to agree with that, and you know, like my history of knowing about auto-tune. Now, first of all, for the record, I don't have a problem with auto-tune. I don't have a problem with the way it was used in the late 90s, whether we're talking about Madonna or Cher, because I don't have a problem naming names from the way I got to know it at first. And I don't have a problem with how they use it today with any rappers, singers, or what may have you. Because hell, I've used auto-tune in a couple of songs, but I'm an actual singer, so I'm intrigued in that experimental part to figure out, well, how would a voice like mine that is jazz trained, classically trained, sang R&B, what may have you, what would that be like in an auto-tune type of situation? So I don't have a problem with it itself. What I have a problem with is the musicianship or what may have you behind it, because they can latch on to a riff or something in reference to that auto-tune, and then it just ends up droned out for me, you know. And another point that you was making was in reference toward the consumer. One of the main conversational campaigns that I have is expanding some of the subgenres in, like if there was an official contemporary hip hop category, the way that there's a contemporary R&B, the way that there's a contemporary rock, the way there's a contemporary jazz category, and I always had those categories for.
Oh, well,
Man down.
he was making a good point too.
I know he's going good.
I know. Hopefully he jumps back up. It's being outside and on your phone, that shit happens. You know how that goes. Drop connections. I want to go back to the consumer. I wanted to say something about the consumers. I think there's a selfishness about it also. Is that we're so selfish as a society already, and we are spoiled when it comes to everything at our fingertip. So it's so easy to overlook things and just not even give a fuck. That's the thing, is giving a fuck about it. So
yeah, that's really what it comes down to. People aren't used to virtually earning those musical rewards, and I can say that on either side of the situation. That could be with the creatives or the consumer. They're not used of going through and earning those rewards that comes with either creating the music or experiencing the music itself.
Yeah. Right. Now, how many albums have you guys bought, right? Where obviously back in the day when we were buying CDs and tapes and records and all that stuff, right? Like you didn't have easy access to the music. So you'd hear the one song and you were like, oh, that's dope. I'm going to buy that album. And then sometimes you get that album and that was the only good song. You know what I mean? So I'm kind of jealous a little bit of these new consumers in a way, because they don't have to experience that disappointment of, buying that album you're so hyped up for, and then you get it and you're like, oh man, I just spent like $15, $20 on this and this is trash. Like at least now you stream it, you go, oh, okay, I like that one song. Let me add that to a playlist. The rest of that's going in the bin. And you don't have that same like remorse, that buyer's remorse behind it. So I'm kind of jealous of that in a way. But at the same time, I'm not, because I think that's formed how we are.
Right. I look at it from two different ways. On one hand, I could see where exactly what you're saying about not having to go through any boring or shitty album cuts or what may have you. but I'm an album cut type of guy. Like for me, it's always been an album wasn't officially cool until I like
more than the singles. Yeah.
His mic went out on my end.
Yep. Yeah, I can't hear none either. Still see
your
him.
mic. Yep, your mic went out, bro. I don't know if you could hear us. Having some technical difficulties.
Oh, he definitely can. I was gonna say he's reacting like you can hear us.
We can't hear you. But yeah, it's selfishness. It's easily consumable. It's all these other factors on how what makes fans nowadays, and it's kind of rough because it's hard to get through to people. Like you really have to bash somebody over the head with your shit, and that's crazy. That's crazy. And like you said, we used to have to wait. We wait years. We wait 2 years for some shit. Yeah, no, he's still not.
Yeah, for real.
His vocals.
Like remember when Lord Drake and Peter Guns dropped? They dropped that single and it was like, "Yo, this is ill," and then we were like, "Well, where's the album?" And then it took, like you said, like 2 years till the album came out. And then when the album came out, we were all just kind of like, the hype had died down. It had a couple bangers on it, but it wasn't, like The Chronic or, it wasn't on the level of a lot of other stuff that, we were looking up to at the time. But like you said, it's crazy how things had more time to really like marinate. And you mentioned fans, and that's a funny subject too, because fan is short for fanatic. I don't know if we really have fans anymore, except for like your Stans, your Drake fans, and those type of fans where like these dudes could literally like rape somebody's mother in front of them, like the Trumpers, and like and the other people on the other side too. Don't get me wrong, I'm not doing that bipartisan nonsense, but like these people really like they look past all of reality because they want the fantasy. And it's like,
I
get it, but at the same time, it's like, it's so inauthentic. And it just doesn't hit for me. It's like, it lacks soul, I guess you could say. To me, anyway. I know other people look at it differently, like a Drake, because he's a singer too and stuff. They're like, yeah, he sings. That's the same thing as soul, but that ain't soul to me. Like he was talking about Motown earlier. That's soul music. You know what I mean?
Right.
And he was talking about neo soul when that came up and stuff. That's different than, to me, the cookie cutter pop approach, which that is what that is to me. And that's not to discredit anybody with talent who's doing their thing. Just because I don't like it doesn't mean it doesn't have its play. I don't like it doesn't mean it doesn't have its play.
Moose, can you hear us? I think, is he back?
I can hear y'all the whole time.
Oh, we couldn't hear you at all. You just popped back in.
Oh, but that's crazy. I was able to hear everything y'all said.
Yeah, we didn't hear a word you were saying. That's why we just kept the conversation going. Hey, it's live, man. It happens, There's all kinds of technical difficulties in this world.
All right. But y'all can hear me now, though, right?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool.
Here's that.
Cool. Yeah, because I heard everything that y'all were talking about, and I agreed with it. It's crazy because it's kind of like what we said. People don't get to earn. It's given to them. It's kind of like that politically correct of the '90s, of the late '90s. Everything could be given to them. The other point I was going to make in reference was that is, on the other hand, putting music together on a playlist, to me, could have that same effect as us sitting around listening to the radio with a cassette recorder and then using blank cassettes and making a full cassette of songs and things that were recorded off of other albums or off the radio or what may have you. That's the closest semblance that I would have to what people go through in reference towards adding music to their playlist today. So I kind of see it from both sides, and we've reached a generation of humans that really wouldn't know anything about it because it hasn't existed during their time period. I have a first cousin right now. She is currently a captain in the Air Force. So she's a grown ass woman, you know. But for a birthday, I'd say about 5, 6 years ago, pre-pandemic, we had a birthday party for her at me and my wife's house, and her mother gave her a record player. Now it was one of them Walmart, Walmart $30, $60, whatever the cost is for record player Walmart is these days. But
Replace
she
those
didn't
needles because they'll destroy your records, people.
clue what to do with it. She was like, at this time, she might have been like 20, 21 at this particular point. It's not like it was a child. This was a college educated, in the military, Air Force officer. And she didn't have the first clue what to necessarily do with, a Walmart record player in reference towards what is it? That's basically what it was. So, and I all of us have been dealing with record players our entire lives, so
Yeah,
it's like
to this
that,
day.
that caused those domino effects, you know.
What's that an
Yeah.
indictment of, though? Is that an indictment of us as a generation failing to educate them, or is that them failing to learn? That's the
It's
thing, too. There's such a generational gap.
it's a little bit of both. I mean, I'm not gonna
Yeah.
put full them because technology comes as a result of necessity. So if they don't have access to it because it's not something that's in their face as much as the new technological stuff, then they're not going to know about it. I mean, we're the generation of us in our late 30s and 40s and onward that basically had access to every single form of technology that there is when it comes to music. I mean, I'm born in 1980, so I'm 44. If you go back years to 1940, the only thing that they're missing that I had access to was the cassette. If you go back even further than that to like 1920s, once again, the only thing that they didn't have access to that I had access to as a child was the cassette. Yeah, we could throw an 8-track on the side too, but for the most part, radio's been around for 100 years. The 12-inch album has been around for 100 years plus. Um, Live performance has been around forever. So realistically, what if the only place now we can go is to a record store and buy $30 a pop albums, but they're not selling that, they don't have any stores to necessarily have to go to because they've signed into Spotify, Tidal, Apple Music, or what may have you, and they can get the last 150 years of music right there on the same way that I'm talking to y'all on an iPhone. Then how would they know how to make use of a 12-inch? And especially if we have people our age who haven't spun records on a common basis since we were in our early 20s. Well, it kind of goes both ways that way.
Yeah, I see it too. Like you mentioned, like is that on us kind of thing, right? That brings me. It makes me think of the how back in the day we had drug dealer rappers, and now it's more drug user rappers. And people like to say like, oh, is that our fault because our that generation in the 90s and early 2000s was like glorifying that. And I kind of look at it like, but not really, because if you listen to those records, the crackhead was the clown. That was the person that was getting clowned. Like, what, you smoke crack? Like, come on. Like, it wasn't like they didn't glorify like being a crackhead or a heroin addict. They glorified the money and the floss that came along with that lifestyle of being a drug dealer and all that stuff. And they would tell stories that drug dealers could relate to and things like that. But back then, though, you also had that balance between the conscious music and the street music. And to me, it seems like the corporations who came in and basically took hip hop and monetized it decided that, you know what, look what sells better: the negativity, the violence, the this, that, and the third. And nowadays you really don't have many of your Tribe Called Quests and your Brand Nubians and these type of groups anymore, because it's not profitable. And being that we're in a capitalist society and we all grow up wanting things, like I know I didn't grow up with a lot of money, so like there was things I wanted. And I'm lucky to say, like, some of those things, as I've gotten older and got a little bit of money, I've been able to attain those things, down to like stupid things like Just like, oh, I wanted that Optimus Prime back in the day. It's back. I'm getting that because I can.
Right.
You know what I mean? Little things like that.
Right.
But it's like, is that on us or is that on them? Or is it on the corporations for kind of fooling everybody and really just taking over the business and making sure that only one lane has been really pushed? And even now they've kind of figured out, all right, the street shit's dying. We need to go into the pop rap because that's making more money.
Well, I mean, I think everybody has a little bit to blame about the situation, because the drug dealing rap 80s and 90s, for instance, were they were glorifying it without glorifying it in the same way that it could be considered glorifying now, because it's not like they were expressing it from teaching somebody a lesson. They would just they were just putting it out there, and then it's just a matter of they left it open to interpretation. They just put it on the table, and it was left up to interpretation. So part of the interpretation was the corporations, because historically, when it comes to music, let's just be real, there's always been a certain side, a certain demographic of people who did the music, and always been a majority of a certain demographic when it comes to consumers. So when you have the consumers that are now the leaders of these corporations that basically grew up idolizing an experience that they may not have firsthand knowledge of, but they are fascinated by it, well, then that's the side that they're gonna continue with. If there's a side of music that's too closely normal or related to them, or something that they can touch, they may not put it out as much. But the fascination of something that you can't experience unless you're going through something in presenting music or movies or television or something of that sort, yeah, that's the stuff that they're gonna push, because that's how it's always been. Now, for me too is, well, I mean, it's cause and effect. If you're gonna spend a whole lot of time with uh people presenting one side of the equation when it comes to drug dealing and drug rap, well, eventually you're gonna have to get a response from the other side. So we're in those generations now. We're like, in human history, we're roughly 2 generations in now. People who may have something to say based upon that other side that they never had access to saying before. I mean, historically in music, we never got music from the person that was suffering as a result of what they were consuming. We always got the story of trying to push it towards people to consume, and now we're just at the point where people are given that experience about, okay, well, they've got it from those people already. This is what it's like to partake in what we're consuming. So I place the blame all across the board. It's a combination. It always has been a combination of things,
So with
Yeah.
the way we are evolving as a society and as a culture, hip hop, where do you see it in 5 years?
In 5 years,
5 years, short
Whew.
term, 5 years. That's a short
that's a
space of time.
I mean, it could go either way. It could go either way for 5 years, because we could be at the cusp of something different. Like the next 5 years, you could have your own form of proverbial disco, or what may have you happen. And the next 5 years could be the modern form of disco in hip hop. But then by the time the next Olympics shows up, it could be gone. Just like disco was there in 1975, but people wasn't really doing disco by like 1980, 81. On the other hand, we could branch off, and 5 years from now, we could be talking about it from the perspective of like what hip hop was formulating, going to the masses in the early 80s as this new thing that's growing, or it could be a subgenre of it. You know what I'm saying? Kind of like, I guess the best example you gave the example earlier, that that Elemental Bruh, in reference towards how rock music started as one main thing, but then branched off. We could be in the midst of a branching off, in the midst of a full-fledged transition away from it. We could be, it could be disco, it could be big hair, or it could be rock and roll altogether. Either way, what I hope for, honestly, is that this, for instance, and I'm gonna go way mainstream in reference towards this, but I think it's a key towards having a trickle effect. This whole Kendrick and Drake beef thing that's going on. I don't have a problem against either one of them. You know what I'm saying? But the way that Kendrick seems to be approaching things now, I'm hoping that he could, take the lead towards having more people pay attention to his.
We're always losing him. We're always losing him when he's making a point.
Right, a good one too. I think I know where he's going with that though, because it's like Kendrick, although he is mainstream, is definitely a conscious artist, in my opinion. He definitely, hits that genre, and he has, for whatever reason, he's touched people in a way where it's gone mainstream, but very particular for him. My hope is, I think this is what he was getting at, is that really inspires a lot of people to realize, like, hey, you don't have to do the cool thing. You can do something that really speaks to your own people and really keep it real, but also still entertain at the same time. I mean,
yeah, I would agree with that. I love the fact in reference towards that specifically. I love the fact that Kendrick is from Compton, because if Kendrick was from South Louisiana like I am, then it might not register as much. But he's from one of the most stereotypical elements of rap, for like gangster rap, but he's pushing something that could be perceived as the opposite of what's been pushed from the.
Yeah, absolutely, because he's from Compton. He grew up in the hood around a bunch of gangsters, but yet that just shows you that just because you're surrounded by a certain element doesn't mean you can't rise above it, learn from it, and then you can kind of go back to your people and try to help raise them up out of that. And I feel like that's kind of what Kendrick's doing, and hopefully in the long run, that's what ends up happening. It's pretty crazy. It's like I think about this in like I'm really hoping, because you mentioned the next 5 years thing, Brad. And my hope really is, I saw a report today, and I don't know if this was true or not, but I guess like a ton of artists got dropped from Atlantic Records today, and they are one of the most guilty of pushing the most trash, mainstream crap hip hop over the last like 10, 15 years, than maybe more than any other label, right? But if they have to drop that many artists and their business is doing that bad, my hope is that this is like the independent renaissance. And you've seen it with Griselda and a lot of these other groups, your Odd Futures and stuff like that over the last 10 years or so, really like coming up. And, the big, like Benny's on Def Jam now, right? But to me, Def Jam did that out of desperation, because they saw all these artists they were signing with the auto-tune stuff really wasn't hitting, and they weren't really selling records like that. And they were like, damn, like, I think we really need to go back to the essence of what we were originally, in a way. Obviously, Snoop, we know, facilitated that a little bit with the, being the president or whatever he was doing over there, and being like, nah, you guys need to pay this man. Like, this is what you need right now. And obviously, we don't hear numbers anymore like we used to. And even when we do, they're much lower than what they were, back in the heyday. But to me, my hope is this is the independent renaissance that really brings the artistry back to the forefront, and less of the glamour and glitz, which, yeah, that has its place. We all like the stories and all that stuff, and like all the behind the scenes stuff. But really, like, my hope is that we're going to end up in this era where it's almost going to be like 70s rock music, when it was really just like you had your Led Zeppelins, your Rolling Stones, and like all these ill groups that weren't really they weren't making music specifically just to sell it to the masses. They were trying to make good music, and that came across. My hope is that's where we're going with hip hop.
Well, some things I want to say, music, just like anything else in human life, goes in cycles. So in this particular case, what we're dealing with streaming and what may have you, and having all kind of consumers only know one or two songs per artist and putting on a playlist, as we were saying earlier, that's just like the 45 era. That's just like when they were selling 45s. So what you're asking for, Elemental, is basically the 70s. What made the 70s, in my opinion, from years of studying it, is the concept of creating full projects. They wasn't just making, I mean, they had their share of corporate backgrounds in reference towards, okay, they have a couple of hit songs, let's put it with the rest of album fillers. But the things that lasted, the things that we still talk about here 50 years later when it comes to rock music from that time period, was based upon the concept of the entire album meaning something. That's what you mean about the Led Zeppelins of the time period. That's what you mean about the Deep Purples and the Funkadelics, and see, there you go. You know what I'm saying? So the problem, and Atlantic, man, Atlantic has such Atlantic has such a history as a label in reference to
Crazy.
doing what you're talking about now, like what you're saying now with the rappers. You can find stories about that with Atlantic going back 60 years easily. I listen to more of the podcasts that do history, music, or what may have you, where you find that out easily. So it's something that's always been going on. Um, the problem is that why they have to drop these artists now is because basically they
Making no money.
they signed all these artists that may only have one or two songs. They tried to get them fully in reference towards jumping on the bandwagon for the one or two songs. And then they tried to use some of the stereotypical traditional approaches toward promoting them, i.e., putting them out on the road, music videos, and things like that. And people, for the most part, deep down inside, people are not going to pay attention to artists like that. They never really have. That's the reason why we don't have 45s now. That's the reason why the cassette single didn't work in the 90s. That's basically it. In order for somebody to be able to put on a show, they're going to have to be able to have at least 20 minutes of music to be able to go on stage. And if you only have one song and 3, 4, 5 other fillers, well, people ain't gonna pay attention to you after that one song, especially if you might have done that song first on stage. So it's all kinds of cycle things. It might not be an entire big cycle of things all the time. It might be just a series of small cycles that come through, man. So streaming ain't nothing different than purchasing 45s to me, except not having to go to the store and all the details and the good things and the bad things that come out of that. And there's been a lot of bad things that's come out of that.
Absolutely. I think the biggest one is really compensation for artists. Is just it's like it's so
that's a whole other conversation.
It's the worst deal in the world. It's so bad.
That's never been something good, because the artists, I mean, we're only now within the last 40 to 50 years where the artist was able to record themselves for the most part on a consistent basis, let alone them owning the ways to get to the masses. The only real true way, in my opinion, that the artists have had access towards getting stuff to the masses was doing shows. As far as the recorded music, there was always somebody else. Whether it was the pressing plants back in the day, to the record labels, to the streaming sources. I mean, look at us here. We wouldn't be able to have this conversation right now if it wasn't for StreamYard.
Right.
People wouldn't be able to watch and listen to this conversation without a third or fourth party being involved besides the three of us. None of us own anything that has to do with the actual broadcast of it beyond ourselves. That's the way the music business has always really been. Like, we are just now getting to a point to where, I can go up to SoundCloud or YouTube or Spotify or any one of them other places and upload it myself without a middleman. But yet and still, you still have a middleman, because you still have a DSP somewhere involved. I mean, I'm having discussions with my one of my DSPs right now, simply because I owed them a few dollars last week. You know what I'm saying? For the right of them to do the DSP situation for me. You know, so but if it wasn't for those
Yeah.
DSPs, would y'all have heard of Moose Harris?
Mm,
Way down here in Louisiana?
maybe not.
That only gets up to New England every 1 to 2 years to do shows?
Yeah. One thing I'd like to give some artists some advice too in dealing with digital distribution: stay away from the subscription model. If they're asking you to pay them like $100 a year, and the second you don't pay them that $100, your music's taken off streaming, don't use them. Pay the $50 to put the album up forever, instead of the, whatever you're paying monthly to get that deal, because it's trash. Because the second you stop paying that, or you hit a hard spot and you lose your job. It's happened to a
Yeah.
bunch of us, right? We're on hard times. You don't have that extra, whatever they're asking for a month, right? But if you save the $50 and really prepare that album and get it ready to go, and then you just hit them with that dough and drop it, like the CD Babies, the companies like that, where you just pay per release, it's always going to be there. It's not going anywhere. And you can keep making money off of it. But if you do these subscription model things, the second you stop paying them, they're like, man, rug out from under you. You ain't getting a dime no more until you pay them.
Right.
So it's, and a lot of artists don't understand that. And they kind of go with the first option that comes along, where they're like, oh my God, I can get this on, Spotify and YouTube Music and, Tidal and all this stuff. And I get it. Like, we all get excited, and not all of us are up on the business aspect of it all the time, because it's a very complicated thing with so many moving parts. And it's really hard to know who's actually telling you the right thing when there's so many different people barking at you all the time with that stuff. And I want to go back to one thing you said a minute ago too, about the album thing, where in the 70s, people would the idea was to make a whole album dope. I feel like nowadays, one of the things that's really happening is people are still putting out albums, but it's really just a grouping of singles. It's not a cohesive album for the most part. So you got these people who are dropping 2 albums a month and stuff like that. But if you really listen to a lot of it, and this isn't for everybody, because some people can do it, but a lot of them is just, it's a bunch of singles, and maybe they don't all hit. Regardless of that though, me personally as an artist, I like taking my time a little bit more than that and really trying to come up with a cohesive album sound to it. And I feel like that is something that's missing these days. So I'm just glad you had brought that up.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's something that is missing, because everybody well, the majority of people always want to have that one hit, that one thing that's gonna set them off and set them up for life and what may have you. The problem with that is that they don't know all the in between details. I mean, I could throw up a subject matter right now that I have conversations with people around me here in Louisiana, and I deal with a lot of people that are younger than me, people that might have been born in the late 80s or the 90s or what may have you. So I may have a decade or 15 years on them. For instance, part of it is so much effort is put into trying to hit that one song, trying to get that one main thing that's going to set things off for everything. I personally, being with so many various genres of music in my life, I don't have a problem with people. They call it ghostwriting these days, right? I don't have a problem with it in hip hop, as long as the end result is true to the person that's presenting it. Now, if it's somebody who ain't nowhere near or the exact opposite of what they're presenting, then that's something different. But I think part of that is people aren't used to working together behind the scenes in the studio anymore. We have too many rappers and not enough songwriters, not enough collaborators, and what may have you. I mean, some of the things that we all grew up on, some of the things that we think about from way back in the day that we absolutely love, regardless of the genre. It could be R&B, jazz, rock music, what may have you. The vast majority of that wasn't written by the artists by themselves. Hell, a good percentage of that wasn't written by the artists at all. They had a team of people behind them in reference towards putting that stuff together. Like some of the most famous writers, like songwriting teams, collaborating teams. That's not necessarily a thing in hip hop, and it ought to be, because number one, I think it would push people towards better qualities of music, and number two, you can keep more of the royalties in house trickling down the line instead of you trying to do 12 different songs by 12 different rappers. Well, you probably could have gotten those 12 rappers together, had 8 fire songs, put it down as an album towards one of whoever presents it the best, and everybody could have gotten something out of it. You know,
Now, let me ask
I
you
don't.
this about that. Would you see, for me, there's a distinction for me between the rap artist and the MC. To me, if you go that route, you can't be one of the greatest MCs if you ain't writing and creating all of it yourself. Excluding, like, I don't mind, like, if me and you are in the same room and I'm working on a song and I'm like, oh, blah, 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 I say this to you, and you're like, well, say it like this. And I'm like, all right, word, that does sound better. To me, that's different than, here's a song. Like, you know how you hear these Drake songs come out, but it's not Drake, it's somebody else. And it's the reference tracks before he got his hands on, right? To me, I can't put those individuals into the greatest MC conversation because of that. Now, you can say greatest artist, performer, all of that, and I'm cool with it. To me, there's just a very clear line between the two because we're talking about two vastly different things.
I don't think that's as much as a clear line between the two, because it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier in reference towards, if we want the consumer to do more towards earning and discovering more music beyond they may see on TV and hear on the radio and all the mainstream stuff, well, then we got to hold some of this in reference towards the artists and the creatives too. There's an in between. It isn't as cut and dry, black and white. I mean, you can go. Drake is a great example to use, but it's an extreme example to use.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's a talented writer in his own right.
Right. There's a countless number of artists that don't go as far as Drake would go, as far as what Aubrey would do. You know what I'm saying? That there's in between, like
Aubrey.
I've never had any ghostwriting like that as far as my rapping and my rhyming is concerned. However, I grew up in a world of, like I said at the very beginning, Motown, Stax, New Wave. You know, so I know about the mic collaboration. I know about the corporation that wrote everything for Motown. I know about God dang, I can't think of his name, from Heatwave, who collaborated with Mike and Quincy on Off the Wall and Thriller and what may have you. I know how George Clinton wrote for the Red Hot Chili Peppers for Bloodshot Sugar Magic. You know, like I that's what I come from. So I'm the type of person that's like, well, why can't hip hop as a genre that humans participate in have some realm of that? Now, I'm not going to 32 bars that either one of y'all have written and go up there and spit it word for word and say it. But if you have something where I can turn around and then make it more a little personal towards myself, make it more relatable towards me, make it, well, I wouldn't say it the way y'all would say as Celtics fans, but as the same Pelicans fans, I may have the same idea, but say it this way, I don't have a problem with that. See, I think too many people jump to too many extremes when it comes to that subject matter, and I think it causes more hurt than help in reference to those types of jumps. But that's just me, you know. That, like I said, I'm somebody who's been involved in like 5, 6, 7 different genres, multitasking over the 44 years of my life. You know, like, I mean, the first band I was in was called the Reggae Ska Conspiracy, and I was up there lead singing, frontman, and rhyming every now and then. Now my main thing is rhyming, but I also play 3, 4 instruments. You know, I can also have some gospel stuff with it. You know, that's why my latest album is the way it is. It's a combination of me rhyming, a combination of me singing, you know, having some sample production, having some live production, because it's all elements of where I come from. So as long as it's absolutely true to me, musically, and I can take a lie detector test and pass that lie detector test based off the music that I present, well then it really don't matter. What I don't understand, I've never truly understood how we could accept all these decades of sampling, but we can't accept sampling for songwriting, for the words. We can do it for the music, but we can't do it for the words.
I think a lot of that is me and Brad, right? We're up in the Northeast, closer to the birthplace of hip hop. And don't get me wrong, the ghostwriting has been happening since day one. There's a lot of stuff like, I remember when Still Dre came out, right? Chronic 2001, or 2001, not Chronic, but 2001. This doesn't happen ever, right? People don't read liner notes anymore. I remember when that came out, I opened the album, saw it, and I was like, S. Carter. I'm like, oh, Jay-Z wrote that. But people still don't know that to this day. But
right,
I think there's a place for it. It's just a matter of like your perspective. So for me, the only time it really comes into play is when we're ranking people as far as like where they stand. I'm never going to put a Drake over a Nas unless we find out Nas had a ghostwriter his whole career. You know what I mean? But if not, I'm like, well, by default, he wrote all that. So clearly he's more talented as an artist because he didn't need to rely on other writers to do what he did. But it's to each their own, really, in the end. It's like, was it good music?
It's a debate on what you like, really. But Moose,
and what you respect.
Moose, it's been a great time. It's been a great conversation. We're coming to the end of our hour. Thank you for joining us. Now it's time to shamelessly self-promote and tell us where we can find you, where we can buy your music. Tell us all your socials, everything.
No problem. I mean, like I said earlier, hashtag Google is your friend. So if you Google Moose Harris, I'm everywhere on.
Did we lose him for the
end?
Instagram and X at Moose_Harris. See, I'm having. I don't know where all this electricity and stuff is coming from. It's crazy. Yeah, we good now?
Yeah.
Are we good now?
Again, man. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no problem, man. Moose Harris is where it is. Just holler at your book.
Oh yeah. And yeah, we're coming to the end of our hour. Check us out next week. The Hip Hop Happy Hour podcast. We out. Peace.
Yeah. Peace, y'all.